Thanks very much. Morning, everybody. So I'm a critical care physiotherapist, and as Sophie said, so I'm just started my third and final year as of my NIHR clinical doctoral research fellowship. And Sophie approached me and asked me to speak about sort of what I was doing to try to transition from a doctoral to postdoctoral researcher over the next 18 months. And it's interesting, it's made me think quite a lot about am I getting it right? And I'm not really sure yet, we'll see. But while I was preparing the presentation, I was really fortunate to have Fiona's slides, and it sort of allowed me to reflect a little bit on how many of the suggestions, how much of the advice that Fiona's giving have I managed to do, and what maybe I need to do a little bit more of over the next 18 months or so. And so my sort of long-term goal is I want to be a clinical academic AHP with independent research. So, ideally, if I was in an ideal world, I'd be part funded by the NHS, part funded by a higher education institution, very similar to established medical careers, continue to treat patients alongside research. However, from an AHP point of view, I worry sometimes, is it a little bit of a unicorn? That sort of clinical academic career. And in fact, only 0.1% of AHPs are in a clinical academic role such as that. And that can translate into sort of underrepresentation in the conduct of AHP research. And we know that only 8% of all NIHR award holders are AHPs. But there are successful clinical academic AHPs. There's a few of them. And I'm just going to talk really briefly about a study that we've done in Oxford, where we look to explore the individual sort of character traits and behaviours of these successful clinical academic AHPs. And it's brought up a lot of the things that Fiona said, actually. And some of the three key things that we identified is that these successful clinical academic AHPs are very opportunistic and very determined. So they don't let any opportunity pass them by. They grasp it with both hands and they go after it in a really determined fashion, often, to the detriment of a lot of other things then. Something else that Fiona identified is response to rejection. All the successful clinical academic AHPs that we interviewed have a very pragmatic response to rejection. They feel it's par for the course. They have their own way of managing rejection, whether that's a sulk for an afternoon or leaving it alone for a week or, going and reviewing the comments straight away. But they all have a way of managing it and look at the positives of the rejection. And finally, they have a really high tolerance of risk. And that can be to grant applications, that can be to approaching people for collaborations. It can be related to posts and leaving the security of substantive contracts and moving on to part-time temporary contracts, but they have this really high tolerance of risk. And sort of as I was reflecting, I think maybe that's where I'm not quite there yet. I'm still a bit risk averse, and maybe I need to think about taking on more risk then. But what am I doing? So as Fiona suggested, I am trying to write as much as I possibly can and publish as much as I can throughout my fellowship. I'm very fortunate with this fellowship. It's given me more time than I'll ever have for research. So I've managed to publish a couple of papers for my PhD, but what I've also tried to do is to try really hard to become involved in other projects and other studies. And I've published quite a few papers over the last few years, and what I've managed to do is write a variety of different publications. So commentaries, letters, position statements, some qual, some mixed stuff, some RCT. And it's really, really improved my writing quite a lot, actually, trying out these variety of styles. And my writing's come along a lot from doing that high volume. What is hard is finding a balance along with my PhD then. I'm not sure if I get that right the whole time by taking on more things. Another thing that Fiona was identified is around collaborations. Something I've spent a lot of time on is building new and then consolidating my existing collaborations. And so I've got a very new and emerging collaboration with a research group in Melbourne, University of Melbourne. So they're critical care rehabilitation research group, and one of the team is coming up while they're in the UK. They're going to come and spend a time with me in Oxford, which is a day with me in Oxford, sorry, in June, which is brilliant. And I've shared a little bit of data with them, but what I've got back in terms of diversity of opinion and approach and insight has been really, really good. We've got a fairly new collaboration with a group at University of Coventry and Warwick, their critical care research group. And again, sort of cost benefit. The cost was that we did a bi-centre feasibility, RCT, unfunded. But the benefit of that is that I'm a co-applicant on an RFPB grant that's just been submitted for the second stage. So again, benefits from that collaboration. And then I spent quite a lot of time consolidating a collaboration that I have with the critical care research group at the University of Oxford. And so I applied for a secondment with them 5 years ago. And after my year's secondment ended, I've carried on contributing, working on the next stages of projects, etc., which has been a lot of time. But again, the benefit of that is now I've been included on as a co-applicant on a program grant and learned a lot from putting that submission in. And so one thing I want to stress is the collaboration started in a lot of different ways. One through Twitter, another through a clinical placement that I did, another through a job application. What they've all have in common is it's taken a lot of time and effort on my part on top of my PhD and other jobs. But the learning opportunities through those have been, immeasurable, and I'm benefiting a lot through that. Another thing that Fiona discussed was finding your clan and like-minded people. And what this looks for me at the moment is being part of 3 separate research groups, which has its pros and cons then. So undertaking my PhD at Oxford Brookes University, and that's at MORES, or Centre for Movement, Occupational and Rehabilitation Sciences, and that sits in the Oxford Institute for Nursing, Midwifery and Allied Health Research. And that's made up of a group of nurses, AHPs, sports scientists, and their focus is predominantly on rehabilitation in long-term conditions, long-term rehab and things. And so my critical care study was the first critical care study that I brought to that group. APRU in the middle there, that's a really, really new and very, very small AHP research unit in the NHS department that I work in. And that focus is mainly on increasing the research capacity of the department and looking to support and explore allied health research in a very acute setting, which isn't as popular an area to research. And finally, as I mentioned then, work in the critical care research group of the Nuffield Department of Clinical Neurosciences in Oxford, which has a lot of critical care research, but next to no critical care rehab research. So in an ideal world, I'd be part of a group like the one in Melbourne, well established, led by an AHP prof, looks at critical care rehabilitation research, but that doesn't exist here. So I'm part of these 3 groups, and it brings a lot of diversity of thought, of opinion, of different approaches to different problems, and I get a lot from it. The downside then is it takes a huge amount of time and effort to be part of 3 groups, and sometimes you can feel that you don't really belong in any of those 3 groups, and you're a slight outsider. But I do think that the benefits outweigh the downfalls then. One of the pieces of advice that I've been repeatedly given from loads of people in a variety of forums is find a research mentor, get yourself a research mentor. And I fell in the trap that Fiona said not to do. So I was keen to find someone who I haven't collaborated with, who was somewhat separate to me, didn't have any agenda with regards to my research or my career. It took me a little bit of time to find someone, identified them, and that was entirely my own fault through my inaction. I was worried about being overly polite. I didn't want to email. I didn't want a cold email. I wasn't sure how to approach them. Huge amount of procrastination, not sure. And in the end, I just bit the bullet and I emailed them. And it was an incredibly positive response, as Fiona said it would be. And we had a couple of meetings, set up what we both wanted from it. And it's been really, really helpful, which has been great. As part of my clinical doctoral research fellowship, the Integrated Clinical Academic Programme offer a mentorship programme, and I've had lots of positive experiences with that and some not so positive experiences, but they give a really, really good bit of advice in that if you have an initial meeting with a potential mentor and you don't think it's going to work and you're not quite sure about it, it's okay to say, no thanks. Thank you very much for your time, but I don't think this is going to work. And that comes the advice that the mentor should also do that approach if they don't really want to mentor that individual. And I think that's a really good advice, rather than persisting with something for the sake of being polite because you've contacted someone. Using your time wisely, another slide from Fiona. I really, really, really try to be targeted with the additional activities that I take on, while thinking about what that overarching goal of being an independent clinical academic AHP. And so what things have I done? So I took up a co-editor role on a special interest group journal, which is ACPRC there, which has given me a huge amount of insight into that other side, editorial process, publishing, etc. And as Fiona suggested, I regularly review for a variety of journals, which is really, really, really time consuming. Actually, it takes a huge amount of time, but it's definitely improved my writing and my appraisal of the literature. And also, I'm sure I'm just as frustrated as the next person when a paper's delayed because of peer review, or they can't find somebody to peer review. And I don't want to be part of contributing to that problem. So it's the sense of giving back, isn't it? Reviewing those papers as a community. In terms of lining up with my clinical work, I'm really trying to focus on that. So I'm on the study advisory group for an NC-pod investigation into post-critical care rehabilitation, which is my area of clinical and rehabilitation and research interest, that's been really helpful. I undertake teaching on the physio programme at Oxford Brookes University and continue to try to build up links with the higher education institution there. And also from a supervision point of view, I've started to dip my toe from a research point of view. So I've supervised some MSc research dissertations. And from a clinical point of view, I also supervise a couple of supervise trainee advanced clinical practitioners then from a clinical point of view. This is the bit I'm not sure I've got right. It's an awful lot. It takes up a lot of time, and I don't know. Sometimes I think I've got the balance right, and sometimes I'm really not so sure actually. In terms of what am I going to do over the next year, as I hope to transition to postdoctoral researcher. So job number one is PhD. My data collection finishes in June, so I'll have all my data collection done in June, and then I'll need to write up my papers and my PhD itself then. And so that the target is to get that done by Christmas. I've started developing a very early stages of an RFPB grant application with a very senior physiotherapy researcher. And that's with a view to me being a co-lead applicant on that grant as well. And that's a continuation of some of my PhD work. I'm going to continue to work on my clinical work, so that's 1 day a week for the rest of my fellowship, and then that'll increase then on the 1st of April when I go back to my previous job. And then finally, which is very much easier said than done, is I'm planning to develop an advanced clinical fellowship application then, hopefully to submit in the spring, which is why I really need to get my PhD in by Christmas then, which this is a lot easier said than done. So in terms of preparing and trying to transition to a postdoctoral researcher, am I getting it right? I've got absolutely no idea whether I'm getting it right or not, but I'm definitely trying. I'm trying really hard. And one thing I am going to be confident at is that I won't look back and think that I didn't make the most of this time that I have now during my PhD, and I want to make the most of it. And I'm trying to be opportunistic and making the most of those opportunities that come my way then. But the next 18 months or so will probably show whether I've got any of it right. But that's it. Thank you very much.